Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we've been visiting about this topic of aviation commercial general liability exposures and the liability that happens due to aircraft servicing operations and aircraft or airport premises operations. These exposures could be applicable to aircraft operators and to aviation businesses and airports alike. So we are going to discuss them in the terms of the aviation commercial general liability, or CGL policy. In the last episode, we introduced the various coverage parts and how to read effectively or find information on an aviation CGL policy. So today, I wanted to get into the insuring agreements, coverage A, kind of the backbone of the airport aviation commercial general liability policy, and that is related to premises and operations. To have any sort of aviation CGL policy, you have to have coverage A. And some people will kind of distill down this coverage and call it just the slip and fall coverage, which is very true. More than half of CGL claims are slip and falls, and more than half are actually won by the claimants. There are more than, according to a study in the National Underwriter a few years ago, more than 25,000 daily accidents. More than 65% of lost workdays are related to slip and fall accidents. And years ago, used to be 70 million annual cost to treat. That can be blown through pretty quickly, especially on an aviation or an airport liability claim. We have seen awards in excess of $100 million just on claims where something's happened at an airport. A bus stop collapsed on a young person, making them paralyzed. That was an excess of $100 million award. Recently, an award was issued for $350 million due to an operation on the airport where an airport vehicle, I think it may be a mobile equipment, hit and seriously injured an individual. So the amounts of the awards, depending on the size of the operation in the airport, can be pretty significant. So the premises and operations exposure for aviation operations is large, and it is very important to address, but it can certainly cover losses outside of just slip and fall. For instance, the times when somebody is towing an aircraft that is not in their care, custody, or control off of their premises, and they run into another aircraft, that could very well be a premises liability claim. But that, I don't open a can of worms, other than it basically is designed to cover the liability that the policyholder becomes obligated to pay for damages out of the operations of the premise with certain exclusions. One of those coverages that is often included is products and completed operations liability. That is a part of coverage A. Typically, these policies are written on each occurrence basis, meaning that a sudden accidental loss or a repeated exposure to a certain event must happen. There are going to be exclusions, the things that are always excluded, as we talked about, like the pollution, nuclear, war risk unless endorsed, all those things. But products and completed operations is also an occurrence basis, but it has an aggregate limit, meaning once that limit is done, you have to buy a new limit, or the policy obligations are met by the carrier. They don't have to offer any more limits. So products and completed operations still under coverage A. It is a separate exposure you want to make sure is included if you do any of the following. So obviously, aviation business who do repair and services, whether that's maintenance, avionics, the sale of fuel and aircraft, selling parts that are not installed, providing any type of aviation service where there could be bodily injury or property damage as a result. That is a potential products completed operations exposure. Now, you're an aircraft owner. You will sometimes, especially on a broad form policy, for an aircraft insurance policy, C, products and completed operations. That's because you may sell an aircraft. If you sell an aircraft and you still have the policy in place if a loss occurs as a result of a crash in that, that products and completed operations coverage on your aircraft policy could respond. Now, a couple quick things to note from an exclusionary standpoint. The products and completed operations policy is not a warranty. It is occurrence-based, so there has to be an occurrence trigger. If they said, hey, you sold me an airplane, but there wasn't actually a loss or a damage, then there's no coverage. That's a different exposure. That's advice. That's a professional liability or an errors and omission exposure. And that's a whole other can of worms, another issue that does need to be discussed. But products and completed operations provides liability protection for those things that the insured becomes legally obligated to pay for losses out of the products sold and services provided to an aircraft owner or aviation business, right? So products liability is something products sold. Completed operation is a service or job done. So typically you see them together in one coverage, but that's the difference. Products is something they sold, an aircraft, a fuel, and completed operations is service, the maintenance, aircraft detailing, catering, so on and so forth. So coverage A, premises and operations, could include, if the coverage is there, products and completed operations. If you do not feel you have a products and completed operations policy, or for some reason you're just needing to carry a premises-only aviation CGL policy, the carrier will exclude products and completed operations coverage specifically under that policy. So coverage A is the backbone. There's a little more to it. We can get into more detail because there's some specific exclusions, but we just want to give you an overview of the insuring agreements. Coverage A, covering the operations and premises on the airport premises, and then in the event that products are being sold, completed operations are being done, that coverage under coverage A. So that's your introduction to coverage A, insuring agreements on the aviation airport commercial general liability policy. So that's all for this episode, and join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. So until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aeris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit aerosinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer: these episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.